to Pilgrim Congregational Church. We're celebrating our 150th anniversary. We're glad for the people that are here and for the people at home. This month we're celebrating our commitment to accessibility. And when Leslie first asked me to head up this committee, I was a little nervous. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but here we are, and I'm very excited. This month we're gonna use this book, Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau, and we're going to focus on 3 parts of it. Today we're going to talk about the history of disability rights. We're going to talk about it from the national perspective and also from the national UCC perspective, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and talk about it here at Pilgrim, which most everybody here already knows, but we're going to still do that. And then next week we're going to talk about the disability justice. The following week we're going to talk about cultural and identity, and then the following week we're going to wrap up with talking about our gratitude for all of our abilities. So it's going to be an excellent month, and we hope you can join us any of these weeks, all of them. I'm so happy to be here with Katie Arnold, who's going to help me with talking about the history.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Katie Arnold. So I'm a disability advocate. I grew up with my sister with intellectual disabilities, and that really shaped my worldview and influenced my career path in a big way, and got me into the disability field where I work. I also got my doctorate in disability studies, so really got to kind of explore how we think about disability in our society and what we can do to really make change so that everybody's accepted with all of their differences. And the book is by a friend and colleague of mine, Emily Ladau, who is a person living with disabilities. She is a nationally renowned disability advocate who's done a lot of work around education and advocacy, and it's, as Debbie said, a really nice kind of quick read. And while you might think the book is geared towards non-disabled people, Emily talks about how people with a disability have their own unique experience and can learn from other people's experiences as well, because one experience is one experience, so everybody can really learn from the book and just from having discussion around this topic. Even though, like I said, I have my doctorate in this topic, I'm still learning. There's still a lot more to continue to learn. And before we dive in, oh sure.
You forgot. Sorry out there.
How's that sound? Is that better? All right. So, as Debbie said, we're going to focus on disability history today, but I want to just give a little bit of background and context before we dive into that, because the first chapter of the book really defines disability. And so I just want you to take a minute and think to yourself, how would you define disability? Just think individually what you think the definition is of disability. This was something when I first started studying this topic, I thought, oh, there must be one clear definition of disability that everybody agrees upon, but that's absolutely not the case. There's a different definition in the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a different definition used by the Social Security Administration. There's a different definition of disability used by most organizations and even individuals. And so, it's kind of like with every word. Even if you define the word family, everybody has a different definition of what does family mean, and it's the same with disability. But the definition that's used really impacts what people are able to access in terms of supports and accommodations and things like that. So historically, there's been advocacy around making the definition broader to include more people, and there's debates about what the definition should be. Also, when we talk about disability, language is very important, And language can be challenging to know what are the right terms to use. Am I, saying this right? And language is changing all the time. The things that used to be the right words to say to refer to people with disabilities have changed and, are no longer. Maybe those older words can be offensive to people now. I know my sister, for example, when she got her diagnosis, the R word, or retarded, was used, which now has become a very derogatory term that is not really used anymore. So that's just one example of how language has changed over time. There's also kind of a debate even within the disability community about the difference between person-first language and identity-first language. So person-first language is saying, oh, there are a lot of people with disabilities within our congregation, and there's certain segments of the disability community that decided we want to be known as people first, and so use people first language. Then there's a different group within the disability community that have come out that say, we're proud of who we are with our disability, and we want to use identity-first language. So you can refer to us as disabled people, and so you have to ask people what they prefer and get a sense of, what they're comfortable with. And it's kind of this ever-evolving thing that is challenging to talk about. There's also a lot of euphemisms used for disability, like differently abled and special needs, and, people in the disability community have different perspectives. A lot of people don't like special needs. A lot of the kind of adults with disabilities don't like that term, but a lot of family members use the term special needs, especially referring to the needs of their children in the educational system. And so, navigating it is one of those things where I'm always learning and I'm always asking people and listening for what language other people are using to kind of model that. And also sometimes educating people about language, because I've been, in different situations in public where I hear words and, sometimes I'll just say, oh, I don't like that word, or I don't like the way you said that, if they say something that to me sounds offensive. And then the word normal. I mean, that's a word that really there is no normal, but sometimes people say, well, oh, I don't have a disability, I'm normal. But that could seem offensive to people as well, using that type of comparison. When you think about disabilities, there's a lot of different kind of lenses or viewpoints to view disability. Traditionally, in our society, we've used the medical model, where it's doctors diagnosing, putting a label on the person's body or mind, and really wanting to focus on fixing and curing. And then there's been a shift in the disability community to looking at the social model of disability, and really saying that the disability is really created more from the environment and the attitudes within our society, not necessarily the difference in someone's body, and that the cure and the fix is not always what people with disabilities want. They want to just be treated like other people and included, and have spaces where they can come that are accessible. So there's different ways that people think about the social model versus the medical model. And then there's the religious model. And that viewpoint has traditionally been more of a viewpoint of pity. Oh, this poor person with a disability, they must have sinned, or maybe there's a history of sin and we need to cast out the bad in them. And there's, a lot of examples of people praying over a person with a disability, trying to release them from, that horrible disability. And so that's part of the, history of this religious model of disability that is kind of out there. So that just gives a little context as we then go into talking about more broader disability history before Debbie will then kind of bring it down to the UCC and the Pilgrim Church. And there's a great timeline that Debbie put together where you can refer to, and I'm not going to go into detail about the general disability history, but I just want to give a very quick overview where in general, a lot of focus on disability really happened related to veterans coming back from war with disabilities. And that was really the first kind of group of people with disabilities that sort of had some leverage to say, wait, we should have some supports and services related to our disabilities. And the first, supports were focused on people who were veterans and became disabled, through their experience in war. And, things have changed over time. I was realizing, there's kind of a dark side to disability history, where there's been forced sterilization of people with disabilities, this idea that, we don't want to have more people with disabilities in the world, and let's try to, force people to be sterilized who have disabilities so we don't create more disability. So that's part of the eugenics movement. And then even there's a Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes, which my son's school is named after, and he was really in that camp, and he has this famous quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, which had this idea of, especially for people with intellectual disabilities, the idea of not having people be able to, have children and have more people with intellectual disabilities in the world. So, there's that dark history, but then there's also history of groups coming together to really advocate for change, to say, wait a minute, this is wrong. We have rights, we have pride in who we are. And so throughout history, it wasn't really till 1990 that the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we think of as like the premier civil rights act for the disability community, was passed. And the common experience of people with disabilities is really discrimination. And the discrimination is different depending on people's types of disabilities. Some people have invisible disabilities and can pass. Other people have more visible disabilities and get treated differently as a result. But in general, being treated differently because of a difference in your body or mind is the common kind of denominator, that discrimination that people with disabilities face, that I'm doing work to really fight against and try to change those stereotypes, those biases, the marginalization that has been part of the experience of people with disabilities. And there have been, historically, the disability movements that have happened where there have been groups of people with different types of disabilities that have come together to really advocate for change, and they don't always agree. They're not always united in the way they, want to make change. One good example is that language of disability I was talking about. Certain groups prefer that person-first language, and other groups prefer that identity-first language. But some of the major groups are through the independent living movement. That's where a lot of people with physical disabilities really came together, and they also created what's called Centers for Independent Living, or CILs. My husband Gary, he has worked at 2 of the different Centers for Independent Living in Illinois. Every state has them. And one thing that's really unique is that over 50% of people working at a Center for Independent Living must have a disability. So they really center that and focus on that experience, that lived experience, and really value that as part of employing people who work there. Then the self-advocacy movement, that has been really focused on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities coming together, saying we don't want to be treated like children, we don't want to be infantilized, we have our own voice. A lot of the self-advocacy movement was actually a pushback from families, where families were doing a lot of advocacy for people with intellectual disabilities, but then people with intellectual disabilities said, we want a voice for ourselves in this movement, and we don't always agree with what our families think. So the self-advocacy movement was formed, and with that, one of the first groups was called People First. And so that was the group that really said we want to be referred to as people first, and the person first language, saying people with disabilities, is what that group has really been promoting and advocating. And then the neurodiversity movement is another movement that really focuses on people who, and really, when you think of the neurodiversity movement, it includes everyone in the whole human, just the way all of our minds think differently and work differently. But the neurodiversity movement really centers the experience of people who are traditionally referred to as being on the autism spectrum and have been really marginalized and thought of, oh, you think so differently, and their thinking has been thought to be wrong or bad or just not as good as the quote normal. And so this group has really come together saying, we think differently, and it can be beautiful and wonderful and create these innovative, new things that the quote normal people don't know or think of or realize. And so it really includes everyone, but really centers that experience of people that have brains that do think in a unique way, and that's part of the neurodiversity movement. So that's a quick overview of some of the general disability history. I'm going to open it up now for any questions or discussion around this part before Debbie focuses it on the more UCC Pilgrim part, especially because I'm going to have to go in a little bit to prep for being a liturgist today. So I just wanted to open it up to thoughts or questions or comments related to some of the general disability history that I just shared. And there may be even things that you disagree about what I said, and that's okay. Feel free to share those, because like I said, I'm still learning.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Katie. That was truly very helpful. I think when I was a kid, disability equaled physical disability. That was, and we're going to remedy that by doing whatever. And in my life, I have a niece who's 50, and her parents fought against her getting supportive services in school because they thought that would further stigmatize her. And so I learned a lot, and I've learned a lot from her over the years.
Thanks for sharing that, Sue. Yeah, the stigma is real, and that's a hard choice that parents and people with disabilities have to make about, especially back in, the days where the stigma was even more pronounced. I think it's gotten better over time with more people advocating, with more, social media and, TV shows, including people with disabilities just having everyday lives, and has really helped to educate people. But there's still stigma out there, and that's very real, and that's something that we all need to continue to try to, work against. Other comments or questions?
What you're saying about stigma reminds me of our member Joel Harris, who I think many of you remember, and who the lift is named after.
Joel Sheffield.
Joel Sheffield, I'm sorry. And he felt stigma against himself. He was very much a person first, militantly advocate, but he would only admit to one of his disabilities. Yeah. And I think maybe today he would not. He's been gone for what, 10 years? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And I mean, that's very common that even people with disabilities have what's sometimes referred to as internalized ableism. We all have ableism, in us. Our society really kind of teaches us ableism in certain ways, and people with disabilities feel it too and experience internalized ableism sometimes.
Similar to Sue, only with my own child. My twin brother has a child who's autistic, high-functioning autistic, but can't hold a job. And he seemed like he was brilliant, right? Because he was very articulate, but he couldn't read. And he was hyper-focused on a certain subject. So they didn't do anything until he was 9 years old, and he tried to kill himself because he was so frustrated. And so when the preschool called me about my own daughter and said, we have some real concerns about her development, she's not really talking, she's not really interacting with other kids, she's just frozen in the middle of the room, I decided that I wasn't going to wait. I kind of had a fight with Byron because I felt like my own brother was so embarrassed, and my own brother was dyslexic and didn't get services until he was in 5th grade, which was really too late. And I think it was his own kind of not wanting to be stigmatized, that he didn't want his son to be stigmatized, but it was a lesson for me because he's 10 years older than what he had. And I thought, what's the downside, especially in Oak Park where the services are really, common. And I'm told now, I don't know if you know this, but like Lydia was at Whittier in the early childhood program. Well, my neighbor's boy is going to preschool at Whittier. I'm like, he doesn't seem like he has. But apparently they're mixing in other kids. Now they want to have a neurodiverse preschool class where it's normalized. Whereas Lydia was in with a lot of kids that were nonverbal, and that was challenging too because she wasn't nonverbal. So I think real progress has been made over the past 20 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Katie. We all learned a lot. And I just have to say, when I do say the wrong thing, which is often I use the wrong word, she very sweetly corrects me. And so then I learned something, and she's an awesome teacher. So thank you so much for doing
Thanks, Debbie. I don't always say the right thing the right way either. So.
Well, most of you have been here as long as I have, so the history that I'm going to share with you is probably part of your story too, so feel free to chime in. In putting this timeline together, I learned a lot, and really the UCC has two, what I kind of like to call the godmother and godfather of disability rights. Reverend Harold Wilkie started out life without any arms, and he became a pastor in the E&R tradition, and throughout his long career, he wrote books about how to create the caring congregation, and worked really hard at trying to adjust people's minds and the architecture of churches, and tried to really work with churches to help them see the advantages of that. And the other person's name is Reverend Virginia Cryer, and she was born with cerebral palsy. She started out life as a American Baptist minister, and in the 70s she decided to become UCC, and from the moment she became ordained, she started talking about how it was important to start a committee on disability. Now, this was another thing that was interesting to me. This happened with on the national level and also on the UCC level. We had names for things in the beginning that changed over time. So the 11th General Synod passed, it was going to be an advisory committee on the church and the handicapped. So it wasn't even like a real thing. It was like an advisory committee. That's like saying, let's get together every once in a while, right? So, but now, by the let's see, I'm not going to say it right, but now it's we call it the UCC Ministries, Disabled Ministries. So we're like a whole ministry now. And so Reverend Carr became the first chairperson of that committee, and I'm sure she worked all the way through. And these people are very interesting, and I think they deserve to have a whole adult ed class just on the two of them. And so I'm not going to delve into more details on them, other than to say that Reverend Wilkie was present at the time of the signing of the ADA, and he was well known because he didn't have any arms. And you know how when you sign a big legislation, there's like 100 pens. And so President Bush handed him a pen. Well, he had no arms, right, to grab it. So he took off his shoe and he grabbed it with his foot. And everyone clapped uproariously for him. So it was an amazing event. And it happens that my parents met Reverend Wilkie, which I found out in doing this timeline. As far as the UCC goes, I feel like the big development was when they started they've been working on this all along, but the most recent thing is what's called A2A, which is accessible to all, and that is a committee that we formed here at the church, and a lot of the members on the committee are here, and it's a great committee, and I'm really appreciative for all of their hard work. And so part of the reason we're doing this is because we want to talk about the past, but we really want to talk about the future. We really want to find out from you all what it is that we as the Accessible Committee can do at Pilgrim to make things even better. And I have to say that it's been a long journey for me personally, and I don't see it ending. But it kind of started for me when we joined the church about 26 years ago. The first committee that Reverend Carla put me on was the 125th anniversary committee. And the chairperson at that time was Beth Robinson. And for all of you who knew Beth, she was a spitfire. She was a little tiny woman, but she had so much energy. She was a retired librarian, and she put together all the archives that Sally and others have gone through. She loved this building. She was the one that spearheaded getting it on the historic registry, which is a blessing and a curse. But she loved this building, and she lived 2 blocks away, and I think she was probably here all the time in those days. So after being on the committee for, I'd say, about 6 months and becoming friends with her, she called me up one night and she said, "Debbie, you have to help me." And I said, "Oh, of course, what?" She goes, "They want to put a ramp on the church." And I was like, I don't know who they is, but I did some quick math and I thought, well, the first floor is up about 5 feet, and every inch that you go up, you have to go out a foot. So if we're going up 60 inches, we're going out 60 feet. I said, well, the ramp would be at the sidewalk of the front of the church. I don't think it would look very nice. She goes, "Oh, they want to landscape it and everything." And I said, okay, well, I'll talk with you about it. And so we formed a group, and I think it was basically buildings and grounds at that time. Bruce Cox was the head of buildings and grounds, and Joel Sheffield was on the committee, and Harry Olson, and Joel Sheffield, and of course Mr. Nick, our beloved building engineer who knew everything about this building, every screw, every bolt. And we went through many renditions of what the ramp could look like, what the lift could look like. It took some time to get the council to approve of putting in the lift, and that was just the first step. Then we had to go in front of the congregation, and as you know, congregation was much bigger then, and we had all of our business meetings in the sanctuary, and it was kind of terrifying having 200 eyes staring at me in the bottom of the sanctuary and trying to explain, this is what we're going to do. And it could all be in my head, but at that time I felt like there was kind of 2 factions in the church. There was the faction of all of our money should go to helping the poor and the homeless and feeding the poor, and believe me, I'm all for that. But there was a somewhat smaller faction that wanted to fix up the building. And at that time, if you recall, the ceiling was falling down in the sanctuary, and the carpet was 100 years old and had been taped and retaped, and I was afraid someone was going to trip on the tape, and I kept trying to tell people, if we fix up the church, then maybe we'll get more people, and then we'll have more money to give to the poor. And I feel like I said that 100 times, but eventually we got it passed. And I can remember Stuart standing up, and he had this great idea. He's like, well, I think we should tithe. We should give 10% of the money that we raise to help, at that time, PADS, Housing Forward. And it was amazing. That money went to be the seed fund for them to buy a 3-flat, which at that time, they didn't have what they have now, and it was a great place for helping the homeless get situated for a little bit till they could move on their own. But the church at that point really decided that we were going to move forward with becoming accessible, and that was amazing. But that was only the first step. And there was raising the money, and there was a big debate over when should the capital campaign be, and then there was dealing with the village, trying to get the permits, which, as all of you know, living in Oak Park is not an easy task. But now we had to go in front of the Historic Preservation Commission, and they were not happy about us touching the front of this building. And I had a lot of conversations with them that if 100 years ago they had known there were going to be cars and there was going to be a big parking lot and everyone was going to come, from the east instead of from the west, they would have put the front door on the east. And I kept saying, we're just going to build a new front door. It's going to look just like the Scoville side. We're going to have a nice little roof. It's going to look just like that. And they're like, no, you can't have a roof. Then you can't see the stained glass windows. It was a big fight, and their whole idea was that we should put an elevator on the back of the building, and that was how people should come in. And even if we'd had enough money, which would have been twice as much money at that time, that was not our idea. And I'll never forget, we had many meetings with the Historic Preservation Committee, and Bruce stood up in front of this like 12 people and just said, no one at our church is going through the back door. And about a light switch went off, and then those 12 people were like, okay, you can have your lift on the front door. And it was like a miracle had happened. And I'll never forget that. So, a lot of you were here then, and you know that we put in the handicap restroom, and we took out parts of the pews, and really we did a lot of work at that first time, and so it was completed in 2004. And I feel like we've done a lot of things since, but I really feel like in a way it seems like a long time, but from 1990 when the law passed that you had to do it, I mean, nobody was making us do it, but we did it because we wanted to. And I feel like Pilgrim is the kind of place where we've always kind of been ahead of our time, starting from the very beginning with the Akron plan. I mean, it was cutting edge thing to think of children first, and that they should learn about God in a different way than adults. I mean, that was unheard of 100 years ago. And then moving on to all the different things that the church has done, whether having the first co-pastor. There were like 4 co-pastors at the time that we hired them, and having African American pastors and gay and lesbian pastors. We've always been, and women pastors, we've always been ahead of the curve, and this was another thing. So we are hoping to get our the A2A has a designation that the UCC, the National UCC, gives, and we're hoping to get that designation. And I just want you to know that there's around 4,000 churches in the UCC right now, and only 24 so far have that designation. So they're going to vote on us in a couple of weeks, and so hopefully before November's over, we'll have it. That's my goal. But I mean, we'll still be on the edge. But this is work that we did a long time ago. And we've been continuing to do with the restrooms and the work downstairs and the ramp to the altar.
What's the designation? Open and affirming?
Well, there are several designations. One is open and affirming, and that we do have. And there's several other ones, but this is something that we learned about, Delina and I learned about when we were doing the profile for the pastor search committee, and there were 6 designations, and I was all ready to check them all off. Yeah, they're like, do you have a climate committee? And we're like, yeah, we have the green team. And do we have open affirming? Yeah, we have open affirming. Do we have justice committee? Yeah, we have. And Delina's like, no, Debbie, we don't. You can't just check them off. It's real things. It's like, but we have the spirit of all these things. And she's like, no, you don't have them. So I had to uncheck some of my checks, but she kept me honest. But now next time somebody does it, I'll be able to check it off, hopefully. So I want to really open it up to, what do you guys, I mean, you can talk about things that we did in the past, but I mean, if there are things that you want to do in the future, things that you're really looking forward to, that would help you access the church in a better way.
I don't have any ideas off the top of my head, but I do want to raise up Joel Sheffield for honor, because Joel was a genuine pain in the behind. He did not give up on this issue for a second. He was vocal, he was determined, he was obnoxious. He was a prophet. He was a prophet in our midst, and he really brought us around. And so I just want, for folks who didn't know Joel, he was a force of nature, and we really owe him a great debt of gratitude.
And his picture is on the lift downstairs. If people don't have a face to go with the name, it's actually, there's a bronze picture of him on the lift.
One of the things I loved about Joel is that he transformed in his thinking about disabilities. He began as talking about the disabled. And I remember him going to a conference and learning new language and coming back and becoming very adamant. So we got to watch all of this process taking place as he became more and more of an advocate.
How did we happen to get him to come? How did he become a member? How did he become an active participant in this congregation?
Good question. Jane, I think maybe several of us would have an answer to that. He was living in the Oaks over on Humphrey, and he would walk up and down Lake Street. And I think he was one of those people who just sort of ended up saying, I think I'll check this place out. How he became involved was he insisted on becoming involved. It was not avoidable. That's a prophet.
He also changed our understanding of what it meant to be a diverse community. We had been thinking very much in terms of diversity being a racial diversity. And he made it very clear that there were other pieces of diversity we needed to embrace.
He was awesome. He was very vocal on the committee. He had a lot of comments, and he was very excited the day the lift was dedicated. He worked very hard at getting Senator Harmon to attend, and it was like his birthday or something. He was so excited that day.
I was very new to Pilgrim. I came here maybe this summer. The lift was at the end of its construction period, so there's a lot of this history that I do not know. But one thing I recall is that Joel was extremely active, not just in disabilities, but in making worship happen. And he was, every Sunday, he was down at the soundboard. He was monitoring the sound quality. He was making sure that people had microphones. And this was not, to my recollection, this was one of his many acts of service that had nothing to do with him being a disability advocate. And I'm hoping someone else can is my memory of that correct?
That's correct.
Pass it back.
He was an amazing man.
I was so delighted several weeks ago to come into the sanctuary and see that part of the pew had been removed, so there was room for wheelchairs. So I wasn't expecting that, and it happened.
I guess my question is for the committee. I know that there are things that remain undone. What would be your first priority in terms of future actions?
Well, I think the committee agrees that our biggest concern right now is the sound system. We have a lot of people who have a hard time hearing. We've worked really hard to make adult ed so people can hear better. It's still a constant, it's a work in progress. The sanctuary, depending on who the speaker is and how close the microphone is, it's a hit or miss for the people that I know that can't hear very well. So and it's not just me saying that we want the sound system, it's the whole company. I mean, I have a vested interest. But there also has been talk about, the lift there are days when I do think maybe we should have put in that ramp, the days the lift isn't working. There is talk about how maybe someday we will put in an elevator. But that would cost a lot more than the sound system. And I don't know how the church feels about that. But right now we're really lucky. Peter, our new member, Peter is going to work on our website to make it accessible for the visually impaired, and that we were afraid was going to cost a lot of money, but he's willing to do that for us, so that's awesome. We're really grateful for him. So that was one of our big things we still needed to do, and so I don't know, Lisa, do you want to talk about?
I think that my sense, of course, is agreeing with those sort of physical. I agree with everything Doug has said, because we have some people, current pilgrims, who have needs for the sound system and such, and we want to make sure that those needs are met. And I also want to be sure that we can be recruiting people, that we can be welcoming people into the community who have disabilities, and I want to be sure that we're known as a disability welcoming community, including with website access. I mean, that's actually a legal issue under the ADA. We are probably exempt from any particular criminal or civil liability for it, but it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether we would be liable. So we want to ensure that the website is accessible and that people who have visual impairments know that a program could be a place for them. I am interested in ensuring that we're fully utilizing the talents of people in our community that have different ways of thinking and seeing the world, and that we can make sure that they are included, not just sitting in the pews, but are actually a fully involved participant in our community. Those things. And more recently, I'm feeling as though, just as we have to be worried about the fact that women's rights are an issue, and the rights of people of color are increasingly at issue, that in this space too, disability space, we have a candidate for president resurrecting the R word, talking about how we want to see people, like disabled veterans, on the days with him. And there's just a lot of rhetoric right now and concern that I think with respect to disability issues too, we might need to be fighting fights that we didn't think we'd ever have to fight again. So I think we want to be looking at if advocacy is going to be needed in this space, that we're ready to do that as well.
And that's a perfect segue for next week to join us for talking about justice issues. Did you want to tell your story about Harold Wilkie?
Sure. he lived in California, so we're pretty sure it was at our church in California that we met him. We were trying to remember. You know, this is a person without either arm, so he doesn't have a copy of his sermon in front of him. He gives his sermon, and he mentioned when he was 4 years old, a parishioner had come to the house. That is you could tell this story, Bill. That they came to the house and saw the mother, saw the mother sitting and watching her son. And he was struggling to get a sweater on. Do you remember that story? And the visitor said, "Why aren't you helping him?" And she said, "I am. I am helping him. He is learning to do it for himself." Well, now, you know, 50 years have gone by, and he's giving speeches a lot of places. And he's on the train. He's often on the train going to a new church. He slept on the train, so it's morning and he needs to shave. Well, apparently in this particular train there was room for more than one man at a time. So there were two men in front of the mirror, and the one man who had two arms and two legs was having a great deal of difficulty with the train moving, and he cut himself. And so Harold teased him and said, "You'll notice that I have shaved myself with my feet, and I haven't got one cut anywhere." So that was the kind of fellow he was. Very smart, very determined, very funny, enjoyed life, proud of what he was, and willing to tell us what he was. Thank you.
Well, we're really glad that you all came, and if you haven't gotten a chance to read the book, we have a couple of copies left, or if you've read it and you're willing to share your copy with someone else, let me know, and I'll get it to somebody who needs to read it. Also, Leslie says you can get it as an ebook online for about $5, so just really hope you can come again next week, and we're going to talk about justice, so it'll be a timely matter. We hope you all can come. Thank you so much.